Mobile hunters, are you looking to make the move to saddle hunting this year? Or maybe you just want to add a few new pieces of gear or upgrade your current saddle gear. If that's the case, then head over to tetherednation.com where they've got all mobile hunters covered. Whether you're new to saddle hunting or an old timer, Tethered is your one-stop saddle shop. From saddles to ropes, sticks, ascenders, whatever it is you need, they have you covered. I've personally been using their gear for the past 3 seasons now. My base setup consists of the Phantom saddle and the Predator platform. And if you're wondering why I've chosen to use their gear above all else, here's the cliff notes. They're innovative and pushing the mobile hunting forward overall. They cut no corners and prioritize the safety and performance of their gear. They care about the community that they've created, and their gear allows me to hunt free. And above all else, I like to support good people doing good work. If you're interested in upping your mobile hunting game, then head to tetherednation.com. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. For those of you that don't know, Skull Brew Coffee Company is a business that my wife and I started to give back more to conservation. We donate a portion of our profits back to conservation organizations and are 2% for conservation certified. Since Earth Day is coming up soon, we thought we'd go ahead and kick off the celebration with a store-wide 10% discount. This includes all of our single origin coffee, single pack pour-overs for hunting, camping, and travel, and all of our merch. Visit skullbrewcoffee.com and use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and get your savings, and let's support conservation together, one cup at a time. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 226. Today, I'm out on a scouting trip to a new piece of public with my buddy Aaron Hepler, and we're coming to you on location in a DIY travel trailer. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine on what I think is the 21st day of April that you guys are listening to this. I think we got the Earth Day celebration, which is right around the corner. April's kind of turned into Earth Month, which is April's kind of a cool month where, you know, the weather starts to change a little bit. You get to be able to be outside. You get some abnormally warm days. I don't know about you guys, but I do enjoy, as much as I enjoy fall, I equally kind of enjoy spring because I dig that kind of cool temperatures before you get to summer. But it seems like we're getting less and less of the spring and just more of like, hey, it's winter, and now bam, it's 70 degrees, which we had a little bit of that a couple weeks ago. But the weather seems to be kind of acting normal to a degree. The green is popping. Was out scouting a little bit this past weekend. The podcast forthcoming with my buddy Greg Litzinger. He and I were out doing some scouting together and got together and did a podcast. But not going to belabor this up front here. We're going to just kind of jump into the session today. And what we have really going on is, you know, I've talked at length to a degree about going north and trying to find some bigger timber to scout. And I, you know, did one mission where I went north into the Poconos in that general area and did some scouting and had, you know, what I would kind of call limited success. And so I was planning to make a second trip. And my buddy Aaron Hepler, who you guys have heard on the show in the past, we don't live too far from one another, which was cool that we got to connect. We met through a mutual friend of ours, Tony Peterson. Is kind of how we were connected. And he's always down to kind of explore and scout some new areas. And he had interest in some of those places just in general as well. And so, you know, I always say whenever you go to scout, if you can scout with a buddy, not only does it make it a little bit more enjoyable to have someone to kind of break up some of the monotony, especially when you're not finding stuff, but also it's good just to kind of be able to bounce ideas off of each other, especially when you're in a new area. It was new to both of us, so we were kind of able to look at things and, you know, think about it. And I would give my perspective, he would give his perspective, and we'd kind of make a plan and kind of, you know, go about the day that way, which made it really enjoyable. And so we took the travel trailer and headed up north again and camped out over a weekend and did some scouting and found some, you know, what I would say is more success than we had the last time. And that's really what Aaron and I do in this session is we break down the scouting trip and what we found and what we kind of think is happening. So we will jump into that in 1 second. Before I jump into the podcast, just a quick reminder that if you dig coffee and you want to try Skull Brew coffee, or if you've tried it in the past and want to get some more at a discount, you can do that right now with the promo code TRUTH. You can head over to skullbrewcoffee.com, use the promo code TRUTH at checkout, and you will get yourself some savings on some killer coffee. That's on all the roasts that we have, the light, medium, and dark roast that we have, it's also on the backcountry single pour over packs that we have that you can use to hunt, camp, scout, travel to in-laws that have shitty coffee, whatever the case is. And then we have some merch there as well. So be sure to head to skullbrewcoffee.com and check that out. So with that, we'll jump into today's podcast. And as always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. We are coming to you not really live because it's obviously pre-recorded, but we are live in the camper out on some public land in PA. It's a little bit of a jaunt from the home, so spending a weekend out here. You guys have heard me talking about hunting the northern part of PA, and so that's what I'm out doing this weekend. But I've got a buddy with me. I got a camp buddy to share the rustic charm,
the rustic charm of the
purple camper. Yeah, that voice, the dulcet tones you hear on the other mic is none other than Aaron Hepler. What's going on, man?
Not much, buddy. Ready to do it.
Nice. Well, hey, first off, man, thanks for coming out and just being part of the party, dude. You know, it always makes it nice whenever you got I don't mind scouting on my own, and I'm happy to do it. And I do plenty of it, just like I know you do too. But,
yep.
I get a chance to go out with Chad once in a while when we scout some places we're going to hunt together and stuff like that. Once in a while with my buddy Wilson, but usually we don't get to scout too often. But it just makes it nicer, like to be able to,
absolutely,
to bounce ideas off of people and stuff like that. So you're not just kind of stuck in your own head, So
yeah, we had some good ideas today.
Yeah, hopefully some of them end up in deer getting killed at some point. But
that would be a good thing.
That would be a good thing, man. But no, I do appreciate you coming out here, man, because it always makes the day go better, right? Because you kind of hit that part of the day after you've just been walking, especially if you're not seeing stuff.
For sure.
Where you're just like, all right, yeah, I'm ready to go back to camp.
Yep.
When you got a buddy, you're like, I can't be the one to wuss out. Unless you got a bum knee like me.
Well,
and then so
I won't call you out for it. It's all good.
It's all good. Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that, But no, we had a good session today. You guys heard me kind of talk about being in the northern PA, scouting a couple weeks ago. I came back to a similar area, had looked on the map. And it was funny because when you and I were talking about coming up here, we were debating where we were going to go.
Yeah.
And, I had this one spot marked because we went and kind of tried to find like topo and cuts and stuff like that. We wanted to focus on that. And man, being here, we were talking about this earlier. It's just, there's so much land here.
Yeah. It's huge.
Yeah. To cover, where if you try to look at it holistically and like think you're going to jump from place to place to place.
Well, we spent 45 minutes just driving to a new place down the road today.
Yeah. And it wasn't even that. I mean, when you look on the map, you're like, oh, that's just around the corner.
Yeah.
But no, it's a 45-minute drive.
Dirt roads.
Yeah. And so, really, and we talked about this a little bit today where I was like thinking about it when we were getting ready to come here, kind of took a page out of Johnny Stewart's book, because I know one of the things that he talked about, and I've only ever done one podcast with him, but I've had the chance to chat with him otherwise. I know he focuses on like a specific area because he literally said, if I don't, I'll drive myself crazy trying to think like, oh, there could be a big deer here. There could be a big deer here. And so I was thinking of that conversation when we started thinking about when we were going to come back here and scout. And so we picked a chunk that was about 1,800 acres, that had a lot of good stuff that we thought would be good. And we were both just like, let's focus on this. And then if we get done, we'll jump to another spot that I wanted to hang a camera that I checked out the last time. And I feel like it paid dividends today. I feel like we got, I think we made progress. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we found some good stuff, especially compared to when you were talking about the last time you were out here and having a really hard time in the beginning.
Yeah.
Definitely found some positive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for anyone out there listening that didn't hear, kind of what I got into in the last kind of round here, it's just so, it's big and vast. And, you get into some areas where there's just not a lot of topography changes that are going to move and funnel deer or move deer or whatever. And so, a lot of the stuff you would rely on in other places, which is like, some of the conversations I've had with like Todd Mead or Hal Blood or whatever, like a lot of that stuff was ringing true as I kind of thought back on the previous scout. And it's just, you get into these areas where you just don't think deer could possibly live.
Yeah.
But today we doubled down on some some different areas that we thought would be that we thought could be productive. And I think what we're going to do during this session, we're just going to kind of go through each chunk that we went to and kind of talk about what we found, what we had seen, some of the things that were perplexing us as we're sitting here, thinking about it, and as we kind of talked about it as we were scouting, things that maybe made sense, maybe didn't make sense. And just kind of bring you guys along for the ride. So, let's jump into like the first cut. So that on that point, when we first kind of got to the top of the mountain.
I mean, the first cut was pretty awesome. It was basically as soon as we got off the road, we were into it.
Mm-hmm.
And those kinds of things, as soon as you find cool cover like that, gives you a good feeling about the place you're on. And pretty much as soon as we got over the top of it, we found beds right away.
Yeah.
There were no rubs in them or anything. Weren't really sure. But
we found one like right there before
Yeah.
we left it. We found one, and it wasn't like it was a hammer, but it was
Yeah.
like, proof of life, shall we say?
And you found the first one, and then I found that other one. Where we're like, oh, this big bed, a lot of hair in it.
Yep.
It's big. Would be in a place that makes sense because it's tucked in the thick a little bit with a little open in front of it. Open up into the hardwoods, but overall, definitely a sign of life. Lots of other sign in there, but really no buck sign in that cut.
Yeah, in that cut, and it was kind of, which wasn't. It was a little surprising, but not entirely surprising. That's kind of like a stupid way to make that statement, right? Because I'm like, it was, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
But I think what we mean by that was we weren't far off the road.
Yeah, it was tucked in between two.
It was tucked in between two roads. So it wasn't, I don't think there's a ton of pressure in this general area. We didn't see a lick of human sign.
No.
Like to speak of in the woods.
Until we got close to that private land.
Yeah. And in that stand that was there, you and I both agreed, looked pretty new, probably that private landowner, because we were
easy access from there.
Exactly.
And it was the biggest point he had available to him from that.
It would be the terrain feature if I were gun hunting and I were him.
Yeah.
It was definitely a gun stand.
Yeah,
Wasn't a bow
he
stand.
could see that whole flat that was his property, basically his whole property.
Exactly. Yeah. So that first cut, what I mean by it was surprising, but not. It's like it wasn't surprising because, it was close to roads, right? Tons of scat, tons of just like traffic sign.
Yep.
And there were just a pile of beds that made you think it was doe bedding, right?
Yep.
And at first, when we first found that first set of beds, we thought it might have been buck bedding just because it was kind of tucked on like the lip.
Yep.
Like if you did the classic 1/3, it wasn't like this ridge was super steep, but if it was just over the military crest where you would kind of
expect
a buck bed to be, yeah. But as we started kind of looking around, we were finding more and more beds, and we kind of realized, all right, this is like doe bedding kind of central.
It was a lot of beds.
Oh, it was just like
every 10 steps.
It was ridiculous. But we were surprised that we didn't find rubs in there, at least like an area that was just kind of tore up. And there were a few little pockets in there. And this was kind of the theme of the day, where there were a few pockets where you would walk up on it and you would find doe bedding, and you would see the scat, the sign, the doe beds, a bunch of them. And you would be like, look, it's just a matter of time until you run up on like an area that's just tore up with rubs, or an area that's just tore up with scrapes. And I mean, all you guys out there listening know, like you see them, like when you walk and you're like, you see like that lone cedar tree somewhere, right?
Yeah.
That's like sticking out like a sore thumb.
It's going to have a rub on it.
Or you see like these, gnarly kind of, multi-trunk kind of trees or whatever. You look at it and you're like, oh, great place for a rub, and great place like with a bunch of licking branches. Like there should be scrapes, right? And this spot just didn't have them, and that was the part that was surprising. The part that wasn't surprising was like we found all those doe beds. Like, okay, this bucks aren't living here necessarily,
right?
But totally was expecting to find rut sign in there, and it was just nothing. And it was a beautiful kind of setup because as you come off of that point, off that cut into the hardwoods, it just opens up into like a big oak flat, essentially. And so you would expect
very open oak flat,
yeah. And we could see how they were kind of getting in and out. Like there was there were trails throughout it, but like there was a clear, definitive one that came from the oaks directly through the center of that cut,
straight up to the next one.
Yeah, exactly. So, overall, I feel like that place would be. I think it would be decent to hunt if you got on that. I think we both kind of talked about if you got on that back edge where the hardwood met the cut.
Yep.
Deer are moving in and out of there. Would maybe even get into like the center of it where there was I think there was that one tree you could possibly get into because it's clear that they're kind of making their way to the center of that and there's just tons of bedding around it. Might even be a possibility, but there's a couple of decent setups there. But I think we both kind of left it going. I feel like there's probably something better.
Yeah,
because it was just lots of traffic. May not see a buck. Maybe get dark deered on a buck, but there wasn't any buck signs saying that they're spending enough time there.
Right.
To get super excited. Would you agree with that? Or
yeah, totally. I mean, maybe you get lucky on a mid-November or something running through there, but that's probably what it's going to be doing. It's not going to be it's not going to be looking in there. It's going to be chasing through there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's going to have a purpose for going there. It's not going to just happen to pass by on a whim.
Yeah. And that one was probably like a little less as far as trees go. If you were going to hunt inside the cut, I think that one probably had less seed trees in it.
Yeah.
Like there were no, a lot of clear cuts have those classic like island of trees right in the middle
to
of it.
replenish.
Yeah. These were kind of spread out and not like a whole lot to choose from in that one.
No, that's why when I walked down through the middle of that and was kind of following that one trail and there was like one lone tree there and I was like, this, because it was kind of in the center of the cut,
Right.
I was like, if you were going to hunt the cut itself, that would be probably the tree that I would get into. But you would never, I don't want to say never, but I wouldn't probably try to hunt it with a stand only because you're going to be hung out to dry because you don't have
there's no cover in there.
With a saddle, maybe you get away with it by being able to hide behind a tree because they're only going to come from one direction. They're just because of where you are at toward the point and where the road is at.
Yeah.
Like they're really only going to come from like we'll call it the north side, you know? And so as long as you're on the south side of the tree, like you should be okay.
Yep.
Not going to get away with a lot of movement, but it'd be worth a flyer. But so that was kind of cut number one, which, was, I think when we left that, we were like, okay.
We were encouraged because, I mean, it's really good cover and there's a lot of good food. And there was, like I said, we found beds. So we're like, oh, we get to the next one. Maybe we'll find the.
Yeah. And I was way more encouraged versus what I had seen the previous scout that I did. I was like, okay.
Yeah, you immediately said as soon as we walked into it, oh, this is way better than last time already.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We didn't even get in it. It was like we were walking the the old logging road up or whatever. And it was just like, I could tell immediately. I was like, yep, this is real deer habitat.
Yeah.
Like this is where you could actually see deer living.
Right.
So, all right. So we'll move on to cut number 2. And that'll kind of be the theme, guys, is like, we kind of cut jumped today for the most part.
Yep.
Like I said, this place is big. And when you get in between these cuts, you're going to you run into one or two things in this area. At least what I've experienced so far. And also what we've seen, because we did some driving today. Once we kind of got some stuff done, we wanted to get done. We drove to some other areas we wanted to kind of quickly check out and scope to see if it was even worth jumping in.
Yep.
And so we got to see a fair amount just by driving. And, you'll get these pockets of cuts and dense foliage. And then you'll get maybe some like oak, like oak forest that butts up against it. But it's pretty open.
Unbroken and open.
Yeah. And then you get like a conifer, evergreen, pine tree, some sort of
all those bottoms, like all the creek bottoms were all non-brush, nothing, no underbrush, all conifer like that.
Yeah. And so the hard part was that, the in between, right? Because there was no there were really hard lines, and you expect, in the classic sense, like where there's those hard transition lines, you would expect like that would be where the traffic was.
Yeah.
But we just weren't really seeing that necessarily. And we'll get to the second cut and then we'll start talking about deer density, spread out, stuff like that. Cause there were a few theories we were kind of batting around. But so the second cut was basically, just north. We'll just call it north cause I don't remember exactly what direction it is, but,
that one's north. Yeah.
Is it north? Mm-hmm. You go straight north across this oak flat essentially, or, oak forest, and you hit essentially some elevation you got to get up over, and it's not a super steep climb, but it's a little bit of a climb, and you kind of get up on top there, and that whole thing is clear cut, and that was a really good cut. Like that was sizable.
Yeah. That one was probably double the size of the first one.
Yeah. Easy.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a saddle at the very end, and then another cut across that saddle.
It was between the saddle was between the cuts. Yeah.
Yeah. Which we didn't get to that second one because we found some other stuff that we ended off on a voyage. And that cut across the saddle looked exactly like the one that we were in,
Yeah. So this second cut was, I think what was cool was as soon as we decided which side to start on, we hit that edge there was that laurel that was underneath of it that you kind of ended up following contour lines below that laurel.
Yeah.
But, and we'll talk more about that. But I think we both ended up going just along the edge of it and both found good hard trails, like a ring trail around a classic ring trail around the clear cut, and you found the one below the laurel.
Yep.
But again, the second cut was by far the best thing that we found, probably as far as like food and where maybe more density was.
Yeah. It was bigger. You could clearly see in areas where there was clear like trail systems that they were using within there. Again, similar to the first cut, tons of scat.
Yep.
Deer sign everywhere, or you could tell deer are living there.
Yep.
Lots of beds.
Yep.
Again,
every 10 steps.
Yeah, it was like a doe bed here, a doe bed there. So I mean, they're literally living in there. And for good reason, because you can get lost in a second. I mean, you're completely covered up in that stuff. And there's plenty of browse and food in there.
I guess we should mention that we started noticing, they burned it too.
Oh yeah, I totally forgot about that. That was, because we could tell that it was burnt, but we were trying to figure out how recent it was.
Yeah, well, by the time we got in there and there's bare dirt, there's still like growth from this past year, so it's probably, we'll have to I'll have to look at the map and see if we can find a burn there, but
right.
It was definitely burned within 2 years. Our pants were black after coming out of that.
Oh yeah, filthy.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of interesting because it made me pause, at least me. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, but I kind of paused for a minute. It was like, this looks real good right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably going to be slamming this fall.
Yeah.
Because the thing was
all that new growth.
Yeah, just a ton of green. It'll be a ton of green growth in there because right now it's a lot of like red briar and stuff like that. Didn't see a whole lot of green briar necessarily in there.
No, it was mostly red mixed with all that fern and stuff.
Yeah. And we know that they'll eat those ferns.
Yeah.
Right. Like, so there's just going to be a gang of food in that general area. Which is great, can also make it a challenge to hunt because trying to get into the middle of something like that, like, again, like you're going to probably have to hunt most of that stuff on the edges.
Yeah.
Because it's just
crispy.
That's a good way to put it.
It's crispy.
You're not going to get in there without making a pile of noise.
Yeah.
Maybe if you went in and maybe, bushwhacked your way through like a little sliver of it to get into like an open spot or something like that.
Yeah. There was that like small old logging road that kind of went through the middle of it that we ended up, we'll probably talk about at the end, but ended up backtracking through the middle of that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could get on that, but I don't think that came out to the end
it didn't. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like there's no ease of access to get into the middle of that to try to hunt it. Like you would have to create your access to get in there. And except you could maybe, if you came up kind of where the ring that kind of goes around the cut and then the one that kind of goes down a little further on the contour line.
Mm-hmm.
If you came up perpendicular to those, you could probably find a spot to pop in and get in off the edge where it meets the laurel.
Right, because it was almost just like a little triangle of laurel. You could probably get in where everything meets right there.
Yeah, and you could probably push in just a little bit there, but like there's not really a way for you to get into the center of it and hunt it. Like that's pretty much
that's gonna not happen.
Yeah, unless you went in and camped, just stayed in your tree all night and waited for the next morning. It's like, and did that. But then so we were scoping that out. It looked killer. We were both pretty stoked on it, and then old Eagle Eye over here stumbles across a shed.
I did. Nothing huge, but
it was a monster.
It's a monster. That monster 6-pointer.
Yeah.
Greg would be excited. Greg Litzinger would be excited.
He
about
loves
it,
big sixes. Well, it wasn't big, but it was a 6. So it's like maybe he'd be kind of excited about it, you know?
It's the biggest one we found.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah.
Put it in perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Eagle Eye Aaron found a shed. His spidey senses went off and was literally like, I think there could be a shed in here. And
Yeah, I totally did. Because I had just said, oh, there's a bed. And I kind of did one of those like, looked around, saw the shed, and I called it out, took some pictures. And as soon as you walked up, oh,
I'm like, shed. Like, there's another one.
yeah,
that was
right in that
buried.
like stump hole or something.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and the funny thing was, I mean, it wasn't from this year. It was an old shed. The one
Yeah.
you found was probably from this year, right?
Probably, yeah. It was bleached pretty good, but it looked like it.
But there's no overhanging trees
No.
or anything there, you know. So
And it's not like got that worn feeling to it, you know. It's
Yeah.
like got the sheen on it yet or whatever.
right, it's got that good still on it, that
Yeah.
good shed
Yeah.
feel. But like, yeah, so I found this shed that was, that thing was at least 2 years old,
Probably.
You know? But it looked like it was the left, because you found the left side
Yeah.
of that buck, and I found the left side. So
Right.
it almost looked like that same buck
Yeah.
dropped his antlers in the
Couple
same
years in a row.
spot
Yeah.
2 years in a row,
Yeah.
because it was the same frame,
So there's
just a little bigger. The one you found was a little bigger,
so there's like a 4-year-old
85 inch,
80 maybe.
like 70-inch 6-point running around in there somewhere,
Yeah.
you know. So, but that, I mean, when we found those sheds, that was really kind of, you know,
That was the confirmed first buck sign that we found
yeah.
for like, oh, there was a buck in this area once.
And it was interesting. I mean, well, first I got excited, right? Because I was like, all right, cool. Finally, like, okay,
Yeah.
found antlers. That's a good day just in general, like
Yeah.
when that happens. But the fact that we're finding them in areas where we're finding like that we're in what we presume to be really good habitat.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, cool. This should get better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, even if we find any more antlers, like feel like we're in the right spot. I definitely
Right.
felt like I was in much more the right spot than I was a couple
The
weeks ago.
previous time, yeah.
Yeah. So we keep kind of trucking on and, you know, found some pretty defined trails and stuff like that. But again, similar to the first cut, we were like not finding scrapes.
Yep.
We would find some historical rubs and maybe some small rubs here and there, but there just wasn't anything that was jumping out, like as much as like doe sign as we were
Yeah.
seeing. And again, it could be slamming last week of October, first week of November, or
Which
whatever.
is, I'm sure, when that probably heats up.
Yeah. But you would still think that there's some type of sign laid down somewhere.
Yeah, all those little saplings in there, we should be shredded.
Yeah. Exactly. And just nothing. Like
Yeah.
just some real small stuff here and there, like once in a great while, and nothing.
No scrapes on the logging road.
Yeah. I mean, we walked some logging roads, just like knowing that those are probably made at night.
Yeah.
You know, and so it wasn't like we were thinking, oh, we'll find scrapes on a logging road. It'll be
Just
a great
trying
place
to
to set up.
understand the sign.
Yeah. Just trying to figure out like where are they laying it down,
Yeah.
you know, and then from there, can we backtrack where they might come from?
Yeah.
Like start looking at terrain. Where's the habitat? Like that's like, okay, let's track this way to see if they're using this or whatever the case is. Like there was none of that.
Yeah.
And it was starting to get a little perplexing at that point because, you know, 2 cuts, like anywhere else I would hunt, if I walk through cuts like that,
Oh, there's sign everywhere.
I would find some sign.
Mm-hmm.
I might not find hammer sign.
Yeah.
Right. But I would find something that says like, hey, this might be worth throwing a hunt at.
Yeah.
I think that would be worth throwing a hunt at just based off the premise that there's so much just doe activity in that general area.
And there's no, you know, with the connecting cuts like that, and so much. I mean, out of those, between those 2 cuts, there were probably 30 beds.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
I mean, we were finding them all over the place.
Yeah. So, like, I don't think deer density is the problem. Like,
No,
I don't think there's a
especially
deer
in
density
those
here.
cut areas.
And we saw deer later when we were driving around.
Yeah.
So it's not like,
Well, and I saw some this morning on the way in
yeah.
too.
So it's not like some of the big woods places I've hunted in the past that literally have low deer density. I don't think that's the case. Like Pennsylvania, by and large, doesn't have a deer density problem. I think in a lot of cases we probably have more deer than we. Yeah. So I don't think that that's the issue here. And what we started kind of talking about a little bit is just, you know, one of the things, and Chad and I have talked about this with some of the places that we hunt, is just like the lack of structure.
Yeah.
Right. And that areas that are really vast and there's not a lot of structure and they just kind of move nomadically.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a theme necessarily. Right. And maybe does are more themed, maybe they're living in these cuts and they don't really move from them potentially. Right. Cause they got the food until the cut grows out and it's not worth being there anymore.
Right.
Or whatever. Like, sure. But it feels like they're spending a ridiculous amount of time in there.
Yeah.
And we still couldn't quite pinpoint, like, bucks have to show up at some point because there's does there.
Right.
We can't pinpoint where.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make any sense if they are here that they're not laying down any sign ever or anything significant. Right.
Yeah. Especially like not even around the edges of it. I mean, they just weren't in those cuts.
And that's why I was walking around the edges, because I was like, you know what? If nothing else, let me just walk the edge and see if I just find something. And then we can maybe directionally get a bearing on like what direction we might want to head. We find a rub line, even if it's not a big rub line, a rub line, or something. And it just wasn't happening. So, at that point, we were still feeling good because we were like, there's a lot of deer sign in general. We found some sheds.
Yep.
Like, we know there's deer here. So let's just move on to the next episode, so to speak. And so we skipped heading over to the cut that was across the draw. And the reason being was that it laid out, when you looked on the map, it laid out very similarly to what we had just walked through.
Same as the first.
About the same size, about the same everything. I mean, would it be worth going and walking through? Yes, I think at some point I would like to make a walk through it.
Yeah.
But I knew I could already in my head, I knew what it looked like.
Yeah, it's just more of the same.
Yeah. And so there were a couple other places we wanted to get to in this general area that were a bit of a hike.
Yeah.
And one was a cut, one was like a nice kind of, oak forest. We wanted to see what it looked like and stuff like that. And so we decided to kind of, go, through that saddle, which was an old logging road that was through that, and kind of head down to like these other cuts that were kind of below the ridge that we were just on that had the cut. Right.
Yeah.
And so it was almost like a stepped cut kind of
it was in
thing.
a secondary ridge system, I would say, down when we got down there too.
Yeah. And so we started walking, first we got into that cut a little bit and didn't find a whole lot of sign along the edge of it. And we kind of came up out of,
we dropped down to that logging road on that.
Yeah. Dropped down to that logging road and kind of walked that out. And then we got to the place where we kind of needed to make a decision where we were either going to like dive in further and start not backtracking, but going, I don't even know what direction that would be. Like, we'll just call it east.
Yeah.
Back toward that private corner.
Yeah.
Right. Because it looked like there was some water down there. And if you got down to the
mucky areas.
Yeah. And so we thought maybe if we get to some flat land, maybe we can find some swamps.
Yeah.
Or
maybe
whatever.
some bottom sign.
Yeah. And knowing that, look, a lot of that's probably made at night or it holds there because it's wet, but at least, it again.
Well, we did think we'd be able to backtrack from it if we could find it down there.
Exactly. It's trying to get some directional information to kind of point us in a direction. And so, but what we decided to do first is like we were looking and we could kind of see like, hey, this gets thicker up here.
Yeah.
Let's go check that out. And so we started walking up and I'm just looking over the edge. Like we're walking on a logging road. I'm just looking over the edge as we're looking to get into the thicker stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm just looking over the edge, checking out whatever's below me. And 20 yards off the road, I'm like, hey, is that a scrape?
Yep.
And it wasn't like a huge scrape, but it was a different color of dirt.
Yeah.
So we walked down to it. It's like, sure enough, scrape. It's like, hey.
First sign of life.
Yeah. It's like, there's another one.
Yeah. 3 all in a row.
Yeah. 3 right there, licking branches in the oddest place.
Yeah.
Like when I looked around and I looked at the map and I'm like, why would there be a scrape? Why would not just one?
Yeah, but 3.
But 3, right?
And they looked like they were hit pretty good too.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I guess we'll bring this up now, and we'll get back to the scrapes here in a second. But, what we kind of noticed, at the end of the day, and even as like I think at this point is when we really kind of started kind of like, all right, we may need to recalibrate what our expectation is for like sign in this area,
right?
And we were kind of alluding to it earlier when we said deer density. That
right.
There's not a density problem.
Right. Not a density problem.
Right.
It's a how much room they got problem.
It's a concentration problem.
Yeah.
Right. It's like they have so many places to go and so many different ways to get there because there's not a lot of structure pushing them in any one direction, that it just felt like the sign that we did find was super spread out,
right,
and not super. I don't want to say impressive, but like, it's not something where we didn't walk into like a primary scrape area where there's like 10 scrapes, trees torn apart.
I'm hanging a tree stand there.
Yeah, exactly. Like you just didn't see that. And so those 3 scrapes in a row might have been the best you were going to get.
Yeah.
And that at that moment, I think is when we started thinking like, all right, we may not find that like rub that's like the tree's destroyed, looks like it was hit with a cheese grater.
Right.
And a pile of shavings below on the ground. Like,
right.
We might just be finding things that are roughed up or whatever, and multiple deer probably didn't hit it.
Yeah.
It was probably made by a single deer. Like most of the rubs we saw today, I would venture a guess that a lot of them were probably made by a single deer.
They had to have been.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they were all in the same general vicinity, same.
It was pockets.
I mean, it would make sense of where that deer was traveling to connect all those together.
Yeah, yeah. So we ended up walking, once we found those scripts, we're like, all right, cool, let's check some more of this area out, right? Because it's like, at least we found some scrapes. And so we ended up looking at the map, and it was like, there was that secondary ridge system. There was a cut, right? And then it kind of went into this bench, and then there was like a bench kind of below it.
Yeah.
And that was one thing that I learned, hunting with Chad a lot, or hunting big woods with him in general, is that, does are going to use the tops, and you'll catch some cruising bucks. And unfortunately, a lot of those cuts were on the tops.
Yep.
Right. Which made sense. Not a lot of buck sign, a lot of doe sign.
Yep.
Right. So these benches kind of stood out to me because there were like cuts around them, and then there were like these 2 bench systems that kind of ran parallel together. Now they would have been a lot better if they connected into like another ridge.
We thought they were going to, where they're going to connect at the end of the ridge there.
Yeah, exactly. So we walked that out. We ended up finding another scrape.
I want to say we did find a scrape there, and a nice sized bed.
Yeah,
because that was where you thought you said you saw a deer as soon as we got onto the bench.
Yeah. I saw a flash of brown take off, and I mean, I thought it was a deer. Could have not been, but then we eventually ended up, after we got through that bench. I'll just kind of jump forward, and then we'll get back to the benches. But when we backtracked to get back over toward that private line to get back in those oaks, and what we ended up coming across was like actually where that deer blew out from, because we could see it was wet there, and we could see
running hoof tracks all
exactly
recently tore up.
Yeah.
And that trail was pretty defined because that was like timber between those two, that little small cut that was at the end of that point, and then that older cut that we had walked through when we got down to that bench.
Yeah.
And that was probably the most defined trail that we found. It could have been because it was muddy, I guess, but
right.
I mean, it seemed like it made sense. And then we did finally find some rubs in there. That was actually where the rubs started picking up. Right, where the biggest concentration of rubs were.
Yeah.
But they were all the same height, decent height.
Yeah.
Same height,
same size trees.
Tree, yeah.
Yeah. And it was hit the same way. Like there wasn't like, it wasn't like, one wasn't like cheese grater, like shredded. They were all like relatively smooth, which doesn't mean anything, but it was just like, you could tell it was likely made by the same deer.
Yep.
And you didn't really see many rubs. Like we didn't find any signpost rubs. We found there was one that looked like it had been hit year over year over year. I forget exactly where that one was at, but it wasn't like it was a huge signpost rub. It just looked like an old historical rub that had been used year over,
Yeah.
Maybe it was the version of a signpost around here.
Maybe.
I don't know, but it didn't catch my attention enough, I guess. And maybe that's shame on me, possibly.
Maybe. I mean, it was the best rubs that we found, but I mean, maybe we just didn't hit the right pocket there.
Yeah. So we essentially kind of walked that bench, found that bed, found another scrape, and that would be a place out of all the spots that we found so far to that point in the day where I'd be like, I would throw some hunts at, and truthfully, I probably should have thrown a camera in there, but
maybe tomorrow.
Also, the reality is that there's not like I guess there was a trail that was going through there that you might just get some movement back and forth because it's, it wasn't. I don't mind putting cameras on scrapes even outside of like the rut and stuff like that because I have a camera on a scrape right now that was hit last week.
Yeah,
like it's clearly the communication hub,
right?
And I will leave cameras up all year on places like that. Not because I'm going to gain a lot of intel in like April and May about what the deer I'm going to hunt are doing.
Yeah. I
just like to know that it continues to be the central like nervous system of the communication center for the deer in those woods.
Right.
Well,
and when we got down out of that cut, we followed those rubs along and got out of the cut. It kind of had that little fold of like whatever, those little seepage ditches or whatever you want to call them. And, there really wasn't anything that crossed it. I mean, there was one trail that we found going across it, but it didn't look like run really hard. I mean, it definitely, something went over it at some point in time.
Yeah,
there
and that bed
was
the best bed that we found. And that was clearly a buck bed.
Yeah, clearly. It was big, dirt down to the dirt, hair in it, big poop in it,
Yeah, and you could see, the way the wind would work there. It's like the wind would be blowing essentially from the way he was laying, would be blowing essentially from his back, from the cut to him.
Yep.
Right. And then he's looking down all through the open hardwood there. That was like a mix of like hardwood and like some evergreen, like some conifer trees or whatever, just really open where he could see a long ways. Even whenever there's foliage on the trees, he'll still have a good visual.
Right. And his backdrop was the clear cut.
Yeah.
So anything coming from below, he'd be right back in that. Nothing's going to get through that clear cut without.
No,
it was too like rocks in there, and
it's just gnarly thing. It's like one of those type that sure deer are in it, but you look at it and you're like, you don't know how.
They're only going in there when they need to.
Yeah, exactly. But that was an interesting bed, and that's the part where I was starting to get baffled because, and maybe baffled's not the right word, like trying to figure it out. I guess maybe it was a better way to put it. Because we're finding this sign sporadically. We're finding where clearly does are living. You would think there would be a rut sign there. There's nothing.
No. And we only found 5 rubs and 4 scrapes at that point.
Yeah. And then we make our way through these cuts and we actually start to hit, we come out of, the cuts where we start to find those concentrations of rubs along that defined trail where we think, that we jumped that deer.
Yeah.
And then when we found that bed, it was like this series of rubs through like the most open timber.
Yeah. On those little hemlocks or whatever they were.
Yeah. Like to where you would never, I at least would never, like the only reason we were following that was because it was
the only thing we could look at.
That, and it was like, we were on the right contour line to kind of wrap around the point of that next kind of ridge system that we were going to hit to go over to the, over toward that back corner, where the private land line was, and while we were following that contour line, it was like, hey, there's a rub.
Yeah.
And then and it wasn't like they were like one after another.
No, every 50, 75 yards, maybe
100, maybe whatever it was. And you'd be like, oh, hey, there's another one.
Yeah.
And it looked like it was all made by the same deer.
Yeah.
And then we ended up, it was like, oh, hey, look at this. There's a bed down to the dirt. But you're like, I looked at the map.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is over here? What is he going to? And it was just the weirdest thing because I would have never thought that you would find a buck bedded in that spot.
Right.
Or that he would be traveling that rub line to that bed.
And what else is odd about it? It's like, we were talking about this too earlier today, is there's no, even on the private land, there's no ag.
Nothing.
The closest ag to any of the borders of those game lands is 25 miles probably. You just don't, like you said, there's some openings, but they're really all people's yards or, giant yards of grass, nothing.
Yeah. And it's not like they're even tremendously close to where we were finding the sign anyway. It's like there's still,
miles and miles.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hike to get there. Not saying that a deer won't make that hike, but
yeah, they could do it quick and all that in the open stuff that we were finding. But.
Right. But in between there, it's like, he could just jump into that cut, get some brambles and some browse, or hit those oaks. Because those oak forests here, when you get into those, I don't even call them flats because they're not flats. They're just oak forests that had been planted however freaking long ago.
Yeah.
And acorns, I was still finding acorns that they could eat now that aren't rotted.
Yeah, we picked a few up and checked them out. Yep.
Yeah, so there's they don't have to go.
Yeah. And most of it's red oak too, so it's a perfect time for them to eat it now,
Yeah. White oaks were definitely harder to come by.
Yeah. Not as many.
Tons of reds, and I mean they'll eat reds as after the whites are gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was still a pile of them. And so they don't need to go to a crop field or whatever. I don't think.
No, they have plenty.
But was definitely getting a little confused by where the buck beds were showing up and stuff like that, so we ended up making our way through that, and again, a little confused, right? We were like, well, let's head over to this other section. That oak forest and that section over by the private was a bust,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad we made the walk over there to see what it was.
We always would have wondered, but there was nothing. I mean, we got up on that rocky point or whatever that was. I mean, there's all these giant boulders everywhere, and there was that rocky point. We got up on that and glassed down there, and you could really see the whole thing without. Yeah, and you could see 500 yards almost in there, probably
easy. Yeah. I mean, it was not It's some of the most open timber I probably ever. Had walked through. You know what I mean? It was we could have played catch in there with a baseball.
We could have. Yeah.
It was that open. That point, I think we stopped and grabbed a little bit of lunch, took a break. And then the plan at that point was we wanted to backtrack to that bed and then walk that cut, because that bed was on the bottom of was the cut that we jumped into after we came through the saddle.
Yeah.
And we wanted to check that out. And then the cool thing, that thing was so grown over and thick, we couldn't walk through it. But when we looked on the map, we could see that there were a couple, some of them, there were 3 old logging roads that were in there. That were really grown over.
Like an old rake or something that you could just walk. We picked one to.
Yeah. Because most of them were completely grown over. This one, you could get through.
Yeah.
So, and, when you looked on the map, it's it was really the only place to walk. And so that was another one of those places where it's
where's the scrapes?
Yeah. They can't walk through any of the brush, right? Because it's so dense.
Well, and there was a lot of there was a lot of down trees in that part too.
Yeah. True. Yeah, that's right. So we thought, I don't know if you did or not, but I thought when we were walking through that, it's oh man, that buck was bedded down below here.
Right.
This one lone kind of brushy logging road that has clearly there's a deer trail at the beginning of it, walking through, right? This feels,
definitely, I mean, there was tracks on it too.
Yeah. It's this feels like a place that we're going to run into a bunch of scrapes and a couple licking branches and an area that's just torn up with rubs.
Yep.
Feels like this is the spot, right?
Yep.
Nothing. Some old rubs, and there were some decent old rubs in there.
A lot of decent old rubs.
But just nothing. And that cut was too old, to be honest, right? As far as for food or anything like that, it wasn't.
Bedding around the edges and using it as cover, but maybe not food wise.
Yeah.
The canopy was too all the new growth was too high up the trees for that.
Yeah, exactly. And so we ended up just kind of hoofing it through that and making it through there. And then at that point, I think we had made the decision where we wanted to go back to that second cut that we were in.
Yep.
Because there was actually a logging road, it's not a logging road, it's an old 2-track that's all completely grown over. So the only reason you even knew or you recognized that it was a logging road of any type is because there's 2 ditches on each side
by side.
Yeah, that it's clear that they were using skidders or whatever to drag stuff out. Yeah. So, it's all grown over, but it was clear that deer were using it, the one side of it, because it was semi open to be able to walk through. And so we were let's walk back through that, get back over to that other end of the cut.
Yep.
And then from there, we will make a decision what we're going to do the rest of the day.
Yep.
Right. And I don't think we found anything worth mentioning. We found more of the same. We found more scat, more doe beds,
another shed.
Oh yeah, you did find a shed. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you found it. This one was
it's a booner.
Oh, dude, it's the biggest spike you've ever seen.
Number one, baby.
Number one. Yeah, I don't even know how you saw it, man. Like, it's ridiculous. But so we found that you found that shed, and then we kind of took a pause for a minute and just kind of, the choices was either walk back through that cut again in a different area, and cover more of that cut, and then head over to the cut that was across the saddle, and look at that, which we knew kind of in our head, like it was going to look like what we had just walked through, and that second cut in general.
Right.
Or we could leave, and there were a couple places you and I marked that weren't too far away that we could go check out. That was like an oak forest, right?
Yep.
And so it was like, so we made the choice to like, all right, well, we're already kind of like close to like how we're going to get out of here. So let's just go ahead and like save ourselves the time. Let's get out of here.
Yeah.
We saw what we needed to see here. There's a couple places where we could potentially come back and set up some cameras if we're so inclined.
Yeah. And I think that was the best decision to make, because I mean, it's just like fishing, right? Like you're in a lake, you're going to, you find like, maybe the bass today are hanging on old, like deadfalls into the lake, or they're hanging on the edges of coontail or something like that. But when you find them, they're always there. You find a pattern, you work with it. Right. I mean, these clear cuts are going to have the same vegetation. They had the same pattern of trails. They had trails that went across and a trail that went around. Yeah. Really the same kind of food, same concept. So really it was a good decision to just pull out and check that out another time. Yeah.
The only thing would have been if we would have found some type of sign over there that would have been like blowing our mind.
Yeah.
But what we had seen to that point suggested, I think at this point, I think when we both realized it's like, I would love to talk to someone who has hunted this area like previously to get a sense, because this is when, we started kind of realizing like, hey, like we just may not find big sign.
Yeah.
Like what we might be finding might be what it is.
Well, we talked about like, oh, maybe, like you said, maybe they're not competing for territory, so maybe their testosterone levels don't get as good as they are
right. Or
any other time.
They just don't have to like
all that aggression and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They just don't have the same competition, which would make sense, because hunting some other big woods places that I've hunted, it's like I've had a similar thing where it's like you just didn't find a lot of scrapes. You'd find a few here and there, and like once in a while you would find like a scrape area. Yeah. And that was like the holy grail. But it's like this one particular area, myself and a buddy have spent, him particularly spent a ton of time in, and he's only ever found one of those.
Right.
In like 5, 6, 7 years or something like that, and some of the rubs, it's like in this place, there's really big deer, like hammers, and you'll find rubs that are on small ass trees.
Yeah.
And it's like, you just don't find like, we've just not found, I personally haven't, like gigantic rubs. And that was what was happening here. And it was like, there were like decent rubs, but nothing big. And there weren't like crazy amounts of scrapes. You'd find one every so often in like what seemed to be really odd spots, really odd places.
We found maybe 5 scrapes total, 4 scrapes total. And I don't think any of them were in a spot where we're like, oh, there should be a scrape there.
Not at all. Like actually, it would be the opposite.
Yeah.
It would be, if someone said, hey man, you're going to find a scrape there, I'd be like, dude, what's this joker talking about?
Yeah.
I would clearly think they don't know what they're talking about.
No.
But they showed up in the oddest places. So anyway, the plan then was to kind of book it out of here and head over to this other oak kind of forest. We drove over there.
Yeah.
We made quick work of that. We walked in. We could tell that it was just another big mature oak timber, hardwoods.
There was nothing that we were interested in down there.
Yeah. It was trying to scout that. It wasn't really any like significant topography that was going to like move deer in any direction. It was a needle in a haystack.
Yeah. And the topography is tough here because it's like you said, it's not, there's no like steep edge where they have to travel along the edge, and everything's kind of like, they kind of seem like they go through it willy-nilly because it's just a long, I wouldn't say it's gradual hill because there's some like steep spots, but there's nothing that like drops off and makes them walk along an edge somewhere.
Yeah. No. Yeah, exactly. Like you'll get into some places where it's like the way you kind of referred to it, like made sense, like where it's like there's some like subtle rolling topography in places, but it's not enough to like
everything just has folds and
right. It would be different if like
potholes.
that subtle topography roll was coupled with like change in habitat or whatever, to where it's like so maybe the topography was really subtle, but the change in habitat made it seem more severe. Yeah. And so they have to make this move or whatever. But you weren't getting that. It's like where you were getting like the hard edges, there wasn't any topography. So like the second cut's a great example. You get that hard edge of like cut to hardwood. Yeah. There was no change in topo. Right. It was just same elevation, same everything, right? Yep. You would get those rolling hills down, or rolling kind of topo changes down where we found some of those scrapes, those 3 scrapes. Yeah. But you didn't have any real habitat or anything like that to start to help predict or direct movement, because the topography wasn't significant enough to change course. Correct. It was just really weird, really interesting, really cool place. Like, it's challenging me to think differently about bow hunting whitetails in this type of setup. Yeah. So then at that point, we checked that out. We got out of there, that oak section, and there was an area that I scouted the last time I was here. Is the best spot that I found, and I wanted to show it to you. Yep. And I also wanted to hang a camera. Yep. And so we got over there, and
before we get to that, though, we did pass something that we need to check when we're here next. Is that brand new clear cut?
Yeah, I forgot about that. That is,
it's huge. It's
giant,
probably
man.
400 acres, I would guess, because we drove a mile down that road almost.
It's the whole side of a mountain. Yeah, like legit the whole side of a mountain,
and it's all brand new tops. Yeah, that'll be hit hard. Yeah, we have to check that out at some point.
Yeah, that's gonna be good. It's I totally can't believe I forgot about that. But that might have been the best find of the trip, to be quite honest. It's like, I don't even know that I would hunt it this year, because, it looked like it was just cut within the past 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. They haven't even pulled the trees out of it yet,
Yeah. So, I don't know. It'd be cool if they went in there and, well, I doubt they'll do a burn now. Maybe they will. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. But it'll be a mess to get through there, because, maybe there's some, it didn't look, there was nothing that they were pulling logs out with yet. So I doubt there's any, logging paths through there or anything like that. So it'll be.
I started thinking that as we were driving back to camp, and thinking like, all right, I'm going to have to spend some time on topo and like see, because that's one of those areas where it's a mess. Yeah. And it's that country there is steep too.
Yeah, that one was that was a lot steeper than what we had found over at the first area.
And so, and it's going to be interesting, because like the cut is on the, it's not sheer, but it's like, it's a steep like drop, like side of the ridge.
End of that point, like the first area we found, that we drove by, is the end of that point is pretty steep. Yeah. And so, look, I know, in talking to Nathan Keelan, like, he's like, deer use that steep stuff. Yeah. Like, all day. Like, don't let that deter you. So, yeah. And we'll look at it and be like, man, there ain't no way a deer can live there or is going to spend time there. But like, they certainly will, and so going to have to do some studying and figure out how to tackle that, because that's going to be, it's going to be hard to scout, number one. Yeah. And going to be even harder to hunt. Yeah. But all those are the reasons why in the next 2 to 4 years, there will likely be a hammer deer. Yep. Or a few inside there
that call that place rut home or home in general.
Yeah. And it seems like stuff pops up here pretty quick, as far as like all that red briar that we were finding. Yeah. And a lot of the tops of that were eaten. Like, there's definitely eating that stuff.
Oh yeah. And when that was the other thing too, is like, as we were going through these cuts, it's like, part of the frustration, it wasn't like we were mad, but like, it was more like trying to figure it out.
We were a little frustrated without finding a rub in the first 2 cuts.
Like, yeah, we were. Yeah.
Like, there should be one on that tree.
Yeah. How many times did we say that? But I think what the frustrating part was that, you could say you found doe beds, you found like scat and stuff like that. And that doesn't always mean like they're spending a ton of time. They might be spending a ton of time in there at a specific time, and then like they're gone. Right. Right. But the amount that we were finding in there suggests it's like, it's not like they're just hanging out in there in like October, November.
No.
Like they're spending a ton of time in there all year round.
Yeah.
Right. And when we were walking through, like everything was nipped off.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like everything was browsed.
Yeah.
You know, and there was still plenty of browse in there, so it wasn't like it was gone.
Yeah.
And that was the part that was frustrating, was that like there's cover, there's food, they're clearly here eating it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, so why aren't we seeing, you know, the sign that should be here?
Yeah.
You know? So anyway, we saw that cut as we were driving by, and that was like super stoked
we stopped
at that
to look
point.
at that for a little bit.
Yeah. And then at that point, we were trucking over to the place that I scouted the previous time that I was here.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show that to you, and I wanted to hang a trail camera. So we got over there, just kind of dove in and quickly kind of beelined it to that area, because that was really where the good stuff kind of started. It's really kind of interesting because it's a big swampy bottom.
Yep.
It's close to a parking lot, so that's not probably really in play for a hunt. But like, what did you think of all the stuff that was behind it?
Oh, it was beautiful. I mean, the cool thing about that area is, again, it's like a lot of just rolling. Like if it was at the beach, it'd be sand dunes, like you know, like a lot of like, and turns everywhere, little hills everywhere, and the undergrowth in there is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point we both were like, oh, have they logged this? And yeah, they have at some point, because there's just logging roads everywhere, and everything is, you know, the growth in there. There's a lot of hickory, a lot of the red briar, and it's beautiful because it's a perfect place, because it still felt like woods, you know, it still felt like timber, because it wasn't clear cut.
It wasn't barren.
Right. It was like select cut maybe, or something like that. But it would be a really good opportunity because you could glass the entire woods, but it wasn't, you know, just like the stuff that we walked through. If it hadn't been select cut, it would just be that mature canopy that we saw. But this was kind of unique because you could glass it like it was open timber like that, but it was kind of like that low underbrush clear cut that would definitely conceal a deer. I mean, it was incredible cover.
It was a 6-foot world in there.
Yeah.
Where it's like most everything was like our head height and below.
Yep.
With a few trees here and there that were huntable trees, you know, or it was an oak that was there to do some reseeding or whatever the case was. But it's the one place I found the last time that I was here that had like some topography that was usable.
Yeah.
Right. Because before we were finding some topography, like you were saying just a few minutes ago, that it was rolling and like it wasn't enough to make them make moves. This was enough to make them make moves. Because where we set the camera, it was kind of like this swampy bog, and you know, a bunch of brush and just stuff off to the side.
Yep.
And as you kind of walk back toward this other swamp, there's a pond back there.
Yep.
And it kind of starts to narrow down. And as it narrows down, you can clearly see where deer are having to walk. And that's what I noticed the last time I was here. And there was still a little bit of snow on the ground, so I could clearly see the tracks, like where they were walking.
Yeah.
And so we hung a camera.
There was a lot more tracks in that area too. I thought.
And then there was a rub in there, a decent rub that I'd found the last time that I was here. And so we went and set that camera up. But the topography, that ridge it's not huge, you know, by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just enough.
Like it's enough to conceal silhouettes and
it's just enough to like also to predict movement. Yeah. You know, and then like Aaron said, there was a few different logging roads that were up through there and stuff like that. So we ended up walking, you know, up through a couple of those and checking out like the top of that ridge and just kind of
find that random food plot.
Just in the middle of nowhere, like there's a food plot that's up there, you know. Because I hadn't been on that top when I was there previously. I went on I followed the logging road out to that other set of cuts that was on the other side of that bog. Yeah. And I walked all those. I found some rubs and stuff like that, but it was very consistent with what we were seeing today in general. It was all, you know, smaller stuff. Yep. It was all, you know, smaller rubs. You would find like a cluster of them here and there, you know, but there was nothing that was like, oh, that's a big sign. And I did not find a single scrape in any of them. Nope. You know, and then we didn't find one in that section either.
We didn't find a scrape in there at all.
No, which was surprising to me. Like,
I mean, it would be, Not even. Well, what's weird is even in that. So that little food plot was what we say probably ryegrass. Looked like it was growing around the edges.
And
of
I
it.
thought for sure when you said, "Hey, there's a food plot up here," you know, you yelled over, and I was like, I bet you there's a scrape along.
There's got to be
least one along the edge.
They hit the edges of it, yeah. And there was plenty of places for licking branches hanging over it, like nothing,
nada,
nothing. There was that one dejected rub though, right at the.
Oh yeah, geez.
When you come into the parking lot there.
Yeah, good Lord. Yeah.
That was shredded.
Yeah, that was literally like the most shredded rub. It's like literally as soon as you pull into the parking lot, right at the corner of it, there is like actually probably one of the best rubs we've seen. And I had seen it the last time I was here. But it was like probably close to chest high, right? And just shredded.
Oh yeah. I mean, the bark was hanging off. I mean, it was crazy.
It's like, nice one. Seriously, it's going to be at the corner of the parking lot.
Yep.
Awesome.
Signpost.
Man. So anyway, we ended up having to come back and kind of call it a day because I busted up my knee, which was awesome. I don't remember when I did it. I slid and like caught myself. And when I did that, it twisted or jacked my knee up. And so I was trying to power through and I was doing an okay job and it just finally like locked up.
You did just fine.
I'm getting old, man, getting old. But yeah, so that kind of put a squash on the rest of our day because at that point it was, I don't know, it was like 6 o'clock, maybe 5:30.
Hungry anyway.
Yeah, and hungry, ready to kind of call it a day. So we came back to camp, ate, and and started doing the podcast, having a little nip of whiskey.
Yeah,
hanging out, talking deer. But that was our day for the most part, man. I don't know. What do you think? What are your thoughts on the future of this place coming back and potentially hunting it?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we need to pick it apart a little bit more. We didn't hit the southern end of this that much. I mean, we thought maybe that looked like a lot of that pole. It looked like it was an old cut, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it'd be worth a walkthrough probably just to see what is in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely getting back out to the area where we hung your camera, I think you could really spend a lot of time in there.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of differences in there. And the cool thing is about that is there was changes in vegetation. It wasn't just like two kinds of vegetation in there. There was a lot of variety in there.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of variety, a lot of browse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and like you said, the scouting by yourself is great. Everything in hunting, you have like something you can do yourself and it means something to you because you get to go out and learn about yourself, learn about the woods you want to hunt and that kind of thing. But doing it with a friend is the perfect way to do it. And we, taking our lunch break today, we had a good time. I mean, we were sitting here sipping coffee for.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the cool thing, man. It's like, it's, look, Aaron, myself like to get after it as much as anybody, but I think some of these trips, what I'm starting to appreciate just as much is like the time of like the unwind.
Yep.
And the conversation.
Yeah.
And that was what was cool. And that was really kind of one of the reasons why I built the little travel camper because do this kind of stuff. Cause it was awesome being able to come back here and just sit down and have a mid-afternoon coffee and some lunch and sit for like 45 minutes and just chat, It
was cool because you have the time to, we swapped stories and also bounced ideas off each other for what we got to check out here today.
Yeah, and then start making a game plan for where we're, where and what we were going to do next.
On the Exxon thing.
On the Exxon
working
thing.
really well today.
Yeah, Exxon thing wasn't working so great today. So I think for me, man, I'm really intrigued by this place. It's, I want to figure out, I want to put out some additional cameras, and I want to probably just let them soak for a year.
Yeah.
And I want to see if some of the areas where we had found, some smaller sign or just the typical sign we were finding.
Yeah. Is that big sign for here?
Are there decent deer that's doing that are in the area of that sign, right? They may or may not be making that sign, but are they in the area?
Yeah.
So that's the one thing that I want to figure out. And that doesn't mean like only what we've scouted so far. It's like, I definitely want to come back and check out some other stuff. We've marked some other stuff.
Yep.
This place is so big. There's other places like on the other side of the piece.
We haven't even touched.
Yeah. I want to get to that new clear cut. I want to check that out at some point. And I don't know if that's going to be a this year thing or if it'll end up being like a next winter thing or maybe, even like late season type of hunt it, and just hunt / scout it. There's some stuff that looks decent that's on the complete other side. That's, almost like an hour drive from here potentially.
We were both looking at some of that this afternoon. Yep.
So there's all kinds of opportunity here that just really, really intrigues me. And today, at least the way I classify today, like I classify it as a win in my book because we got some proof of life. We started finding some sign. We started finding some of the right habitat. Now it's just figuring out what all that stuff means in relationship to here.
Yeah.
Because you can't think of the sign in new places where you go, even if it's in the same state, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You have to think of it in context of like the habitat and what the deer are doing there, and how they act in that area.
We could drive to the opposite side of this and it could be a world different.
Yeah.
Because it's probably an hour and a half away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we drove to the middle of this and it was 45 minutes.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah. So cool, man. Well, with that, I think we can go ahead and shut this shit show down. And I think I might have one more little nip of whiskey and
call it a night.
And call it a night. And
maybe get to hang a camera tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, it's supposed to rain, so we're hoping, fingers crossed, that we at least get a little break in the morning where we can get out and maybe get a camera or two hung before
we can boogie on down there.
Yeah, before we get doused. But thanks for coming out, man. I appreciate you. Appreciate you coming out and hanging out.
It's been fun, buddy. Thank you.
Yeah. Road dog. All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you'd be able to do those two things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.